Hey, everybody. Welcome to a new series and that I'm really excited about. And I'm really excited for the very first guest on the series of Think Business Exclusives, Getting to the Soul of Business. Maurice Pogoda, I'm looking forward to diving into our talk. I want to give everybody a little background on you before we dive in. First, I just want to say this, for those of you who listen to my podcast, Think Business, these are going to be a little bit more of a deep dive into two or three people who are not only doing great things in business, but really just making a difference in the community and in their market sector, and just all around just have something in them that you just can't learn in school. And so that's what we're gonna dive into in these series. Maurice Pogoda founded Pogoda Companies in 1987. And as president, is responsible for overseeing Pagoda's overall operations and for assembling its staff of professionals. Since its inception, Maurice has created a nationally known company that has brokered over 90 self-storage properties, representing more than $325 million in sales, managed and or owned 68 facilities with over 4.2 million square feet of storage, and built or renovated 18 storage properties. Pogoda Companies consistently ranks among the top management companies in the United States. We'll go into more of your bio, Maurice, but I appreciate you being here. As somebody who was in real estate for many, many years selling apartments, I always admired you from afar because I sold apartments and you were the self-storage guy. And I always thought self-storage was so great because it was like selling apartments with no bathrooms, right? With like no people. And
yeah.
And it always, I sold a couple and I loved it. And I always thought, God, maybe I should be a self-storage specialist. And I've always admired your business, your growth. And what I want to really get into today is your drive. We're in a world today, as we sit here recording this in October of 2021, where I really love talking to people who have just what I call an old school drive.
So John, is that rain too loud?
No, it sounds great. It's very relaxing. Yeah, it's perfect for the.
That is not my white noise machine. It is pouring today.
Yeah, it's perfect for
Michigan.
Yeah, it's perfect for the energy of this show. So I want to go back, Maurice, before we talk about all of your success. I want to kind of rewind a little bit. And I want to kind of go back to the first, 10, 15 years of your life. And I want to know what were some of the driving factors and forces that planted the seeds to kind of, shape the drive and the hard work ethics that you have today?
I think a lot of that comes from where I grew up and also my particular circumstances of my parents in relationship to me and my sister. And I grew up in Brooklyn, in New York, and it was a very different time than now. It was a time that I can remember having so much freedom, very different than people worrying about their kids playing on their front lawn today, that something might happen. I can remember at 5 years old having the freedom, and maybe my parents were delinquent, I don't know, but I don't think I was atypical, that I was on the streets in the nearby schoolyard and playing with friends, really all by myself. And that continued on right up until I left for college when I was 17, and really left Brooklyn at that point in time. But if you're on any of these old school Facebook groups where they talk about the quote unquote good old days, excuse me 1 second, John. I'm going to close this window. It's pretty loud. All right, I'm back. So it was, it was a time when basically your parents, they basically said, come back in before the streetlights. When the streetlights come on, that's when you're back in.
Yeah.
So I think I was shaped a lot by that, and I mean, frankly, my name was an unusual name. It still is an unusual name, and I think that affected my relationship with other kids, and I had my share of defending myself, so to speak,
Yeah.
and that kind of creates a lot of a lot of who you are based on your circumstances. My parents were older parents. I am an adoptee, and they adopted me when they were in their 40s. And so I think, and it was very, again, different then than it is now.
Yeah.
Closed adoption, you don't know anything, a lot of hush hushness. And I think a lot of that shaped my being, that I always needed to make my way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was my drive. I was the kind of kid that my father would wake me after snowstorms at 5 a.m. because I had a bunch of people that I recruited to let me shovel their walks. I did that. No one pushed me to do that. I had the paper outs back when newspapers used to exist. And even throughout high school and college, even though my parents my father was a very successful attorney, never wanted for anything, always had good allowances. I was fortunate that he paid for my college at the University of Pennsylvania, and so it wasn't like I wanted for anything, but I always just seemed to want more.
Yeah.
And I always worked, always throughout high school, and also during college, and of course post college.
Yeah. Yeah. I love. Thank you for sharing that story. I love what you talk about, always wanting more. I think there's there's that question that people ask: are entrepreneurs born, right, or are they made? And I don't know if you can teach somebody to always want more. It's kind of that. It's like that, just that internal clock, right? So when you have the DNA of always wanting more, how do you get fulfilled?
Well, that's a very interesting question. I I think I'm personally lucky that I've got a great marriage to my wife Lori. We started the company together in 1987. I've got 3 wonderful boys that are all not boys anymore, all in the business. And it's an interesting question about the chicken and the egg type of thing.
Yeah.
But when it comes to drive, I think you can surely dampen someone's drive. And fortunately, the business for many years has been very successful. We live a good life, but we never spoiled our kids. We always treated them independently. We always treated them in a certain way, and with the expectations that they were going to be somebody on their own. And I think you can easily dampen people's drive. That really didn't answer your question.
No.
I just think in general, I think it's trying to come to the realization that how lucky you are.
Yeah.
Being very thankful. When I think back on this COVID period that we've lived through, and sometimes it's like, oh my God, I'm indoors again. I'm not going anywhere. And then you go, whoa, hold on here. Look at how lucky we are, and what we have, and the ability to do what we do. So I just think it's being grateful.
Yeah.
And the only thing I would say is that doesn't diminish still wanting more. And I don't necessarily mean that in a financial sense.
Yeah.
It just, there's just a drive.
Yeah.
And I'm just, I think I'm lucky that I have that drive.
Yeah, I think COVID taught a lot of us that fulfillment isn't always running after the next dollar, running after the next piece of market share, running after this. Being grateful for the moment, and fulfillment is you know being present and finding the joy in what we do all day. I found that I remember the first 2 months, 2.5 months of COVID. Um, I loved being home with my wife and kids. It was great. We played Monopoly almost every single day. We ate together every single day. We cooked together every single day. I was as fulfilled as I possibly could have been. I mean, I didn't like what was going on in the world, obviously, but but I agree with you. I think getting centered and getting back to gratitude is a huge thing. I want to back up for a second and talk about your name. I love your name. I think I love unique. You're talking about how unique your name is, and my name is John, right? So it's
Yeah, right.
it's and my son's name is Jacob, and my daughter. We wanted her to have a unique name, and at the time it was much more unique. 16 years ago, Aria. This was before Game of Thrones, and so what has your name taught you about you?
Well, my name, I was named after my father's father, who I never met. I actually I never met either of my grandparents, and both of them had died relatively young. My parents were, as I said, in their 40s when they had me, and there'd be no reason why they still wouldn't have both parents, but that
Yeah.
wasn't the case. And my father's father's name was Morris, so I think they thought they were Americanizing it by giving me the name Maurice. And I think what it meant for me is that I was truly unique.
Yeah.
When I say that, meaning you can Google Maurice Pogoda, and there is not another Maurice Pogoda in the world.
Yeah.
All three of my sons, we purposely gave relatively easy name: Adam, Daniel, Michael. You can Google their names, and I'm pretty sure that there are other pagodas out there with their name, but we wanted, with my experience, it made me averse to giving
Yeah.
a stranger name, because growing up, it was just always it was always something that I was made fun of, frankly.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you take it? Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't, depending on the context. And so it just I don't want to say it defined me, but it helped define me, having an unusual name.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate you sharing it. Well, for what it's worth, I love the name. I think it's greatly unique. And maybe because my middle name is Wengro, which is my mom's maiden name. And, when I tell people, they're expecting my name to be like, Jonathan Stephen, or, something of that nature. But Wengro is and so I carry my grandfather's, my grandparents' name, and I love it. But when I say to people Jonathan Wengro Dwoskin, they're like, "What?" but I love it because it connects me to something very deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm thankful for it now,
Yeah.
but very, very different than early in my life. It's just
Yeah.
it had its moments. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way.
Yeah. Maurice, what was it like the day you found out you were adopted?
Well, that's a very interesting question that you asked, because my parents never told me. I was told in a fit of anger by my older sister, who I'm very close with. And she told me, I think I was about 10 or so. And so she's 6.5 years older. So, and I must have, I think I was a bit of a handful. and I must have done something to upset her, because even with that age difference, growing up, we were very close.
Yeah.
And she told me, and I don't really remember, but it was like, wow. And it wasn't something that was like some people that I thought about all the time or anything like that. It just wasn't like that.
Yeah.
It was just, okay. Once I think I got over the shock, it's, again, when you talk about gratitude,
Yeah.
I mean, I was brought up by great parents. They were older, which at that time was different again than what I believe being older now I am to my children. People today are younger than they were then.
Yeah.
And my parents' sensibilities were much older sensibilities. So I think that was more shaping than the adoption.
Yeah.
The adoption over time was like, these are my parents.
Yeah.
My mother was a homemaker. My father was a very successful Brooklyn attorney, which in New York has its own connotations. The people he represented were very colorful. And I met a lot of people over the years that my father represented. And that was a trip unto itself.
Yeah.
So
I bet.
It was not something that really defined me.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad to hear that. That's a beautiful story. What are two lessons? A lesson that you learned from your mom, and a lesson that is the most dominant that you carry today from your father, and one from your mother.
Well, my father was a very hard worker, and he really worked. He loved what he did. I believe we have on his tombstone that he loved the law. And it really, I learned a couple of things from him. So one was his work ethic. And I think that reinforced my own work ethic.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was not to be as absent a father as he was.
Yeah.
So he was gone from about 7 a.m, and he drove me to school a lot of times. But, I took the subway to school starting when I was, 10 or 11,
wow.
up until I went to college, because I went to high school in Manhattan. So sometimes he drove me, sometimes he didn't. More often than not, I took the subway. But he would come home, he was involved in charities and in the synagogue and all these things. And he would come home sometimes 8, 9 o'clock at night, sometimes, for dinner. But that wasn't what I wanted to do with my children.
Yeah.
Besides one basketball playoff game that I missed for my younger son, Michael, I don't think and that was because I was out of town for a storage convention. I don't think I ever missed any of their events. And I was there with them for breakfast and dinner virtually every night, unless I was out of town for a storage convention.
I love that.
So, and my mother, my mother was a generous person to a fault. So I think I learned generosity from her, and she was a very large presence, both as a person. She was a large woman, but she was also personality wise a very big person. And if we had Thanksgiving in a Brooklyn apartment, we had 30 people, and she cooked it in a tiny 6 by 8 foot kitchen. I don't know how she did it, but she never knew how to not be generous.
Yeah.
And so I think I learned some of that from her.
Yeah.
So those would be, and the other giving two rather than one to your question, the other thing that I learned from her is to not be depressed about life.
Yeah.
She was a little bit of a depressive, and I learned to that's really not how you should go about things. You've really got to be happy with what you've got.
Yeah.
And we're all very, very, very lucky.
Yeah. Wow, I love listening to those types of. Thank you for sharing that. Those were beautiful. Um, you talk about your dad's tombstone, what he has on it. My dad passed away a few years ago unexpectedly, but years before that, we were at a funeral at the cemetery, and we were accidentally stepping on a tombstone that happened to be. My dad was a dentist, and it said DDS on it. And I said, oh, that's so funny. Why would anybody want, why would a dentist want DDS on their tombstone? And my dad said to me, well, hold on, kids. I want DDS. You better put DDS on my tombstone, And I think my brother and I would have never done it had it not been for that moment. And so I always get a kick out of that. But I think it's also beautiful how you talk about, I think it's really hard. I'm 49, been in therapy since I was 25. So I'm not schooled in this, but I think it's really hard to break lineage, right? So when you see your parents doing something and rise above that frequency to do something that's more in alignment with your soul, not kind of those old patterns. So I appreciate the story.
Well, John, I'm sure that there's absolutely nothing I've done that my kids will not want to repeat.
Yeah,
I'm certain of it.
that's
But
great.
you see
Yeah,
those things, and I think you pick and choose
yeah,
from your parents what you want to emulate, and one or two things that you go, I think we can leave that in the past.
yeah, yeah. It was when you talk about your mom cooking, I mean, and you know this, I'm Jewish. I grew up in a very Jewish home. And so I can smell the apartment of just kind of, what that smells like. So it sounds, like a lot of warmth at those
Well,
dinners.
the other thing that I remember so distinctly is that every Friday night for many, many years while my grandmothers were alive, and when I was old enough to drive, I would go pick them up, but they would come for a Friday night dinner. And my mother, at the end of the night, both grandparents would come home with two huge shopping bags filled with food.
Yeah.
And that was, a very, generous thing. They were fortunate that they could afford to do that,
Right.
but it was just the concept of doing that
Yeah.
that was so impressive to me.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. I love those stories. Maurice, what do you miss most now that you're here in Detroit? What do you miss most about living day to day in New York?
Hmm. Well, we get back to New York a good bit. We have an apartment in the West Village, which was a new adventure for us because I am a Brooklynite,
Yeah.
and that really, as I started this conversation with you, that is a very strong part of my identity, and in a lot of ways, I think has really helped me here in Michigan. And frankly, one of the reasons I wanted to leave New York originally and come to besides that Lori's family's here, and that was a good place for us to be. But I don't know. When we get back, which pre-COVID was all the time, we had a great time there. But I honestly just love getting back here. We get back to our house here, and I look outside, and I breathe a sigh of relief.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm in the country.
Yeah.
And New York is a lot of fun. The energy, I that's probably what I would say I miss, if I miss anything. Great restaurants, is we've got our share of good restaurants here, but you could go a few years eating at great restaurants and never repeat in New York.
Yeah.
And that that's a lot of fun.
What's
But
your, sorry, go ahead.
I would say the other thing that, in contrast to a lot of people, I like being in the subways.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's, for instance, Lori's favorite thing to do, but it's the quickest way to get around. We haven't done it again since COVID, I hope we do it again. But that was part of my day to day for 4 years going to high school.
Yeah.
45 minutes each way in the subways, and that had its own adventures because stuff over the years went on during the so-called bad years that helped, I think, form me as well.
Love it. What's your favorite restaurant or favorite food to eat in New York?
Oh boy, there's just there's so many. I think the little places, the not the big commercial places, but even the little ones around Broadway, the ones that New York food snobs go, oh, there's nothing good there.
Yeah.
And some people would say, oh, there's no good food on the Upper East Side.
Yeah.
Well, one, that's not true. And everything, all the restaurants in the West Village, that's the only place to go. And I would tell you, there are great places there, but there's great restaurants all over. I would say the one that right this moment just quickly comes to mind is a place called Sushi Nakazawa. And it's a place where they charge you a week's salary, and they serve you, I don't remember, it was 6 or 8 or 9 courses of sushi. And you'll have 2 or 3 tiny little pieces of the finest sushi you've ever experienced in your life. And I mean, they're not giving you wasabi.
Yeah.
They're not giving you ginger.
It's like, old school. It's old school. Yeah.
It's like asking for ketchup at a fine steakhouse.
Right.
They look at you like,
right. They kick you out. Their waiting list is too long. Right.
But just you have to make the reservations weeks in advance.
Yeah.
You got to cancel it 3-4 days in advance. Otherwise, you get charged an arm and a leg. But I think in New York, those little places that are like no other place.
Yeah.
Because here I'm just as happy going to all the Birmingham haunts.
Yeah.
And eating great food there, and I consider those to be very fine as well. It's just New York is just a little different.
Yeah. Well, I don't mean to, you mentioned a very high-end restaurant. I'll lowbrow it for a second and tell you my favorite place is Magnolian Bakery and their banana pudding. It's one of my favorite things. I love it.
That's just we walk by it all the time.
Yeah, so good.
There's always a line out the door.
Yeah, so good. It's so good. All right, so I want to move on to a little bit of business. Joanna and I have taken our kids to New York a bunch, and sometimes when we go with our father-in-law. And every time we walk by Carnegie Hall, he'll say to my kids, "Hey, kids, you know how to get to Carnegie Hall?" And they'll say, "How, Papa?" And he says, practice. And so,
by the way, John, that's where my high school graduation was.
Oh, was it? That must have been pretty cool.
It was in Carnegie Hall. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
That was very cool.
That's cool. That's a beautiful place. So, we talked about how you're a native of New York. You graduated from the University of Pennsylvania. You received your MBA from the University of Michigan in marketing and finance. And so I want to talk about that because I love, in real estate, you got to know numbers, right? So there's your finance element. And I think to grow a business, you got to know marketing. And so I love marketing. And so how did you, I love the combo of the marketing and the finance, right? It's kind of like the left brain and the right brain coming together and doing, phenomenal things. And so talk a little bit about, how you look at marketing. I think that's, I love, I could talk about marketing forever, but how do you look at marketing? What does marketing mean to you?
So in college, my freshman year, I took a course that was fun, but formative for me. I took a course called Social History Through Film. And it was a course and you'd say, wow, this sounds like a dream. Right. But every day at 4:00, we watched a movie. And, some people went to one movie a week. Some people didn't go to any movies. my friends and I went to every movie. And since this was the early 70s, I think it would be different now, that same course. But the first half of the year, the first semester was focused on silent films.
Mm.
And silent films basically ended around 1929. So you had all the early cinematography, everything from the infamous Birth of a Nation to Doctor. Oh, I'm forgetting the exact name of it, but just a myriad of these great films. And the course was focused on film as a reflection in both directions from society. That's the way I look at marketing.
Yeah.
That helped. I think I looked at things that way before, but that course that I took that year, and I was a TA for the next 2 years for that course. And it gave me, I knew what I was doing every day at 4:00.
Yeah.
And these were the greatest films of their time. Everything you could ever imagine, from Citizen Kane to, at that point in time, to Easy Rider and The Sting and, all the other great films in between. But it shaped the way I look at things, because even now, and I'm not as much of a movie buff, life has a tendency to get in the way of movies, but I'm not as much of a movie buff, but I still look at those and still see, where does that fit into today?
Yeah.
And I look at marketing in the same way. Why did Easy Rider come out in 1969? Why did Bonnie and Clyde come out in 1967? Two of my all-time favorite films. And how did they reflect society at that time? And they would not have come out in the 1950s or in the 1970s. So marketing to me is the same idea of what influences the way people make decisions.
Yeah.
And how do you help shape that narrative?
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're talking about. I also love movies, and I talk a lot about movies when it comes to marketing, because movies define the the ideal storytelling, right? There's the guide, there's the hero, there's the villain, there's the victim, there's the turnaround, the success. I mean, there's so much storytelling in movies. I love what you're talking about. And, it's interesting. You're talking about making decisions. And today, in today's world, I think, especially with COVID and people's attention span, less than a goldfish, it's hard to make decisions, right? It's hard to make decisions. And so, how do you make decisions? I think making a decision is a really, really difficult thing. I think it's one of the hardest things as a business coach, as I talk to people, all over the country. There's decision fatigue. It's hard to make a decision. Sometimes people don't know the formula to make a decision. How do you make a decision?
Really, by making a decision.
Yeah.
I know that
I know what you mean. I'm laughing, but I'm not laughing. Right.
Yeah, no, I'll give you the example, and I don't know whether it's that I'm lazy or whether my attention span isn't that great, whether I don't want to do the research, but I'll give you an example on a personal and a business level. We've done extensive renovations over the years in our home. And Lori and I work very well together, is that she will essentially narrow everything down. She'll narrow it down. She's a great researcher, and she'll narrow. Let's make it up. If you're reupholstering something, she'll narrow it down to 3 fabrics with a decorator, and there'll all be 3 that she'll be happy with, and she'll say, Maurice, which one do you like? And I'll go, this one.
Yeah.
And it's just a question of I'm lucky that I'm pretty decisive.
Yeah.
Not pretty. I am decisive. And it's the same way in business and it's the way I like to work now. And you and I have had a lot of discussions about my business.
Yeah.
And I prefer that other people do a lot of the background, and I feel I have enough experience to be able to say, okay, those are 2 or 3 great paths, but for this reason and this reason, I think we should go down this path.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, they just they dilly-dally. They just can't make a decision. They go back and forth. They go this or they go that. And at some point you just have to go, we're going to do this, and until proven wrong, we're going to keep going down this path.
Yeah, I love it. You know what I love about what you said, Maurice, is it's so simple, it's complicated, right? You really got to tap into your gut. You got to tap into trusting yourself, and make it right. Best way to make a decision is to make a decision. All right, so now let's kind of continue to walk down this path. Maurice, the entrepreneur. After graduate school, you spent a number of years as a marketing brand manager for Lever Brothers in Manhattan, working on such well-known consumer products as Whisk, Dove, Snuggle, Concentrate It All. After relocating to Michigan in 1985, you worked for an income property brokerage company. You sold multifamily properties, shopping centers, and office properties before forming Pogoda Companies and specializing in self-storage. Everybody, success is never a straight line, right? And so give kind of the Reader's Digest version of what your, line looked like to get to realize, because I think this is really important. I just want to highlight this for 1 second. I think a lot of people out there are trying to kind of find hey, I'm here, but I'm not completely fulfilled. I'm here, I'm not completely in alignment. There's something there. And where I'm at doesn't feel completely right, but yet people going back to making a decision are afraid to move, right? So many people are kind of stuck in their space. And so just kind of share your story a little bit about how you knew when it was time to evolve.
Yeah, it's, to just fill in what you'd asked about before, the marketing and the finance, because it does dovetail into going into the future, is that being here and getting my MBA at Michigan, those are the 2 areas that tapped into probably the 2 best sides of my brain.
Mm-hmm.
The marketing was a little bit more creative, but I'm not a advertising agency creative.
Yeah,
I'm not that kind of creative. I wish sometimes that I did more things like play guitar or draw or paint or something like that, but I don't. That my mind just works in how do you influence people through marketing.
Right.
The other side was, my high school years, I was a science and math guru up until I hit calculus. Once I hit calculus, that I realized I had met my match. But besides that, I was.
Wait, Maurice, I just want to interrupt you for a second. I was a math major, and I majored in actuarial science for a while because I was so good at math, and then calculus destroyed me.
Yeah,
and so I just
and just as a totally interesting side note, and I don't even know if this is still available today, but for the longest time, for SATs and all the various ones, Stanley Kaplan was one of the major tutoring companies out there.
Yeah.
Well, for calculus, and so this gives you an idea of how long ago it was during high school, I used to go up the stairs to his 1-room office and take tutoring lessons from him before he really became Stanley Kaplan.
Oh, right.
So
you took from Stanley Kaplan.
From Stanley Kaplan himself.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So he wasn't that good because he couldn't get me to be good at calculus. So that really appealed to me, and when real estate kind of came into the picture, and that came into the picture of moving here because Lori's family has a strong real estate background. Her father was a big industrial developer. and offices and apartments, the whole shebang. And he and I worked together for a little bit. That wasn't necessarily the best match. I think we're both strong personalities. And then I went off. I didn't want to go back to the corporate world. That just wasn't my scene.
Yeah.
I wasn't a guy that was going to keep heading up that corporate ladder and playing that game. It just wasn't me. So I ended up working at a income property brokerage. I kind of learned the trade, and that's where the marketing came back in, because I started hearing about self-storage, and that wasn't something that very many people were working on. And in marketing, one of the things you've got to find your niche. You got to find that little spark that either is a spark for a campaign, or a spark for a new or a new product, or your lane in what you do. And turns out that was going to be my lane. And since I was in brokerage, I ended up starting with Lori, the company. She's a speech pathologist by trade, and she quit her job, and we took a tiny little office and spent $20,000 for computers I had more power in my Fitbit than what those computers had for $20,000. But I wanted to be on the cutting edge at that time.
Yeah.
So that was it. No one knew really what self-storage was. I brokered for a few years. That was great because no one else was doing it, and I was able to have a bunch of quick sales, and that was great. Made some money. Was able to move into my first home ever in my early 30s. I'd always lived in apartments my entire life, having grown up in New York and colleges and all that stuff. And just one thing over the years, with plenty of dips and valleys in between, led to management, led to development opportunities, led to owning properties, bringing in investors, which we're continuing to do today with all three of my sons now in the business. And it's just it was not a straight line up, that's for darn sure.
Yeah.
And every recession felt like it was 1932 again, and we were in the middle of a depression. And you look back on it afterwards, and you go, God, that was a buying opportunity.
Yeah.
But when you're in the middle of it, you think you think your world's exploding.
Yeah.
But it's been really a good ride. It was a great selection, and it's a lot tougher now being in the business than it was in 1992, 1993.
Yeah. What what are some of the things that you've learned about yourself in growing your business? I mean, you've grown a significantly successful business. Just to recap one of the things I said earlier, nationally known, brokered over 90 self-storage properties, representing more than 325 million in sales, managed and/or owned 68 facilities with over 4.2 million square feet. And built or renovated 18 units in one of the top management companies in the United States. And so when you look at that, before you answer that question that I just asked, this is a different question. Can you sit back and say to yourself, hey, I'm pretty proud of myself. That was great.
I actually think I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ask it, and I want you to expand on it, because I talk to a lot of very successful people, and I think a lot of times they can't do that. They don't take time to really think about it and say, hey, you know what? I am proud of myself that I did.
John, it's interesting that my close friend and who was best man at our wedding, he used to say to me in the early days when I'd call him, I'd say, oh, this happened. And he would say to me, Maurice, you fooled him again. And I read about this, that a lot of successful people really wait for it to all unravel. They don't believe it.
Right.
I do believe I do have that in me.
Yeah.
I do have that cynicism. And if I was looking at the Maurice in college versus the Maurice today,
Yeah.
I think what would surprise me most is how conservative I am in actuality, when forever I thought I was a rebel.
Mm-hmm.
And that conservatism, financial conservatism, I should say, has kept me very grounded. And it's a little bit of a push pull today with the next generation in the business, because I have experienced the downside.
Yeah.
So that to me is probably, I can sit back and I'm very proud of having this successful company and what's been accomplished, and my place in the self-storage industry,
Right.
which I do consider myself to be one of the pioneers, and I think my peers see me that way.
Yeah.
So that's patting
Good.
myself on the back a little bit. But there's always that, still always that feeling of, I know how I felt in February of 2009,
Yeah.
when I thought that it was all going to evaporate.
Yeah.
And I believe I've set myself and my family on a more secure financial footing since then. And and one of the things that, as a real estate guy, that I'm proudest of, and for people that are in commercial real estate, they'll kind of hear this and know what I mean. But I'm proudest that, among other things, but never missed a mortgage payment, and I've never been on any bank's, never had any of my properties be on any bank's watch list.
Right.
That's actually a really big deal, because
Right.
if we were to look around town, some of the most successful names have had bankruptcies, and more power to them.
Yeah.
It's some of them had to, some of them used it as a business tool, etc. But I always tried to be conservative enough to withstand anything that was going to come down the road. And I think that surprises me in a lot of ways more than so many other things, because I would never have believed that about myself 35 or 40 years ago.
Yeah. I love it. I love it. That's great. I love it. So now that you're able to sit back, pat yourself on the back, I'm so happy to hear that. And I think people who listen to this need to hear it, because I think people have a really hard time, like we talked about. You are a pioneer in the industry. You are featured, regularly in Oakland Business Review, Crane's Detroit Business, Commercial Inc. You served on the Self Storage Association Foundation Board of Governors for 7 years, founder of the Self Storage Association of Michigan, and quoted in the news, et cetera, et cetera. So now you've built something, and now, as you talked about, the next generation and your boys coming into the business, right? And so
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. So tell me just how that feels, right? I mean, to be able to, my son is 18, my daughter is 15. I don't know what they want to do in their life, but to be able to, if I were able to work with them and see them every day, I would never get annoyed with them. They may get annoyed with me, but I would always love seeing that. What a treat.
Well, John, I would say that's not. You might find that's not necessarily true.
Well,
look, I am very fortunate.
Yeah.
And I was just actually talking to someone recently that I was talking to about a self-storage article. And they were saying, we last spoke 4 years ago. What's happened in the last 4 years?
Yeah.
I said, well, 4 years ago when we spoke, if you would have said to me in 4 years that all three of your sons would be in Michigan, all three of them would be working in your business, you would have a wonderful daughter-in-law, you would have a brand new 1 month old grandson, my first,
Yeah.
our first.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, thank you. I would have said you're nuts because 4 years ago, all three of them were living elsewhere. Two in New York, one in Chicago, and one by one, for various reasons, all positive reasons, they came here and were all accomplished in their field. So, I mean, the youngest Michael will be 29 next month. So they've all had careers, and the oldest Adam is 34 and Daniel's 32. So they've all had careers before, and that's what I would never have wanted it any other way. And I would say that to anybody, you know, don't bring your son or daughter into your business after college. It's gonna be heartache for you. It's gonna be heartache for them. They don't have the experience. They don't have the worldliness that you want. And I was lucky that wasn't the case. So it's an amazing feeling, and we all get along very well. We constantly bounce things. You know, I've had my phone's ringer off, but I've seen out of the corner of my eye that I've got a bunch of texts from them, and you know, it's great that during the day. But I think, John, I said this to you in another context, that this is also a very different generation.
Yeah.
That, you know, we're talking on a Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon. I know that in the next hour or so, all of those things are gone. They're done for the weekend. They're over. And, you know, it's good that when we do speak over the weekend, and now with the new grandson, it's a whole different ballgame because we're over there a lot. But over the weekend, then it all goes into the personal level. You know, for me, business never stopped.
Yeah.
It has never stopped. I mean, we took a trip to China 5-6 years ago, and I don't know, it was like a 12 or 14 hour time difference. And I was always working.
Yeah.
I don't think that's good or bad, because I surely can relax without a problem.
Yeah.
But all of that, they're different in that sense. And that's one of the things that you've got to realize, that your children being in the business with you, they have their own styles, their own way of doing things, and that doesn't make it any better or worse than my style.
Right.
So that's the interesting, that's fun. We're having a good time. We're going nuts buying deals, and it's you know, we're in this crazy expansion mode, and it's a lot of fun.
It's great.
It's different than I would ever have imagined it. And frankly, I never really did imagine it, because I just never imagined that they'd be here. And for the moment, our business is centered on being here, even though we're growing throughout the Midwest and upper and lower Midwest. And eventually there'll be satellite offices and all those things, because they'll have to be. Right. But it's still centered here. I didn't think anybody would want to move back here. And they love it, by the way.
Yeah.
Love it.
I love it. You know, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, just being grateful. You're blessed. You're blessed. What have your kids collectively taught you? I know you're teaching them a lot about the business and things of that nature. What have they taught you?
They've taught me to think a little bit differently. They've taught me to think about business life a little bit differently, because, like I said a moment ago, they think about it differently than I do, and they've kind of forced me to mellow out a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, that and that's probably, most people that know me would probably agree that that's a good idea, to not always be, you know, focused on the business.
Yeah. It's good.
And it's just it's fun, it's new. The third son just literally joined the business this week after successful careers at United Airlines and General Motors and in corporate finance. And already I've seen the way he looks at things and what he's going to bring to the table. You know, the other two are really focused on acquisitions, and you know, every day there's something new. Every day there's something new that they're telling us about that's an interesting possibility, and most of them die 2 days later. They're overpriced. We don't want them. They're not our quality. They're blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But every day there's just something
Yeah.
new. I never get bored. Never.
Yeah, that's the business. I love it. I love it. That's the secret, right?
Yeah.
Well, what a beautiful story. I want to talk a little bit about community, right? I think I can't talk about, you know, getting to the soul of business without talking about community and your involvement and how community is wrapped into everything that you do. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of, you know, just that element, that piece of the puzzle, and how that, you know, adds to the gratitude and fulfillment kind of theme we're talking about a little bit?
Yeah, it all goes back to that whole gratitude element, and you know, whether it's by luck of birth, luck of location, you know, that we're born here in the United States. In my case, that I was adopted by parents that had great values and that were charitable people. I mean, Laurie's parents were pillars of the community. They were involved in every Jewish charity under the sun, and heavy philanthropic, and without a whole lot of what's the right word? They weren't necessarily anonymous, but they weren't looking for
The fanfare.
they weren't looking for the fanfare. And you know, we believe in the same. We're involved in secular and non-secular charities, and you know, things that I mean, just from a practical standpoint, both my parents at the end of their lives, for instance, were helped by hospice. And I believe that's a wonderful thing. And I believe strongly in their mission. So, you know, for many years, we were both on various boards for hospice. And you know, right now, one of the secular things that we're very interested in is Brilliant Detroit. And Brilliant Detroit helps with homes in the city of Detroit. Carol and Jim Bellinson's baby, and it's wonderful because not everybody has the fortunate births and the opportunities that we had.
Yeah.
And then there are a myriad of Jewish charities that we believe in and believe in supporting. Yeah. So and there's a number of others, but those are examples, and community is important.
Yeah.
Though we live in the suburbs, Detroit is part of our DNA here, and it's somewhat self-serving to help Detroit.
Yeah.
Besides that, it's the right thing to do. It's also good business.
Yeah.
So there's just so many, and there's just way too many people that just sit back and think someone else is going to do it.
Yeah. I love it. I've interviewed Carolyn. I know Carolyn. I've interviewed Carolyn about Brilliant Detroit. It's an incredible organization. As we wrap up here, Maurice, I have a couple last few questions for you. One, how would you define yourself in one word?
Driven.
Has there been any article, TED Talk, book that you find has inspired you through the years?
I would say there isn't. No, I am not a huge business follower in that sense. I read voraciously. I used to be a voracious book reader, and maybe this is the Google effect
Yeah.
that we all talk about. But I read news articles and business articles all the time. But I'm not a business book or a TED Talk person.
Yeah. But what I'm hearing you say is just reading. You talked earlier about delivering papers. I just actually started getting the paper delivered about 2 months ago because I missed holding on to a paper, and it's been great. So I find daily reading that type of stuff is I don't know. It's very grounding to read.
But John, going back to what I was talking about that social history through film,
Yeah.
I connect all of that in everything that I read.
Yeah.
So when people are suddenly, for instance, shocked that there's some kind of bubble that bursts and it changes business, or that inflation has suddenly reared its ugly head again, or those kinds of things, all of that is just paying attention.
Yeah.
All of that is just connecting all the pieces within society and what's going on together.
Yeah. No, I
And
love it.
that's my view of the world.
Yeah.
So I don't look to business books to tell me the 7 highly effective things, habits that business people do, because I like to believe, I bet if I looked at them, I would think, maybe I do 4 of them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but what I'm hearing you say is, you have intuition and you're reading the tea leaves on a daily basis. And I love that. My last question is, fast forward, Maurice, 50 years, 100 years, what do you want the Maurice Pogoda legacy to be?
Wow. Okay. That's, it'll be interesting because everything has to evolve. It'll be interesting just on a business level where the business goes under this next generation and whether it continues on from there. In our community, you could look at the show stacks, and the show stacks are, let's see, they're 1, 2, 3, they're 4th generation now, if I'm correct, with and maybe at least 4 generations within their family and extended family.
Yeah.
In some ways, I would hope that goes on, but I'm not naive enough to think really that much about that sort of stuff, because most of us barely even know the names of our great grandparents.
Yeah.
So I don't really think about that. I just hope that my children are successful, and I don't necessarily mean just in business, but in life and the way that's in their personal lives as well as their business lives. And I would hope that they create something that, if they're interested in it, that will go on to a generation afterwards. And it may not be long-term self-storage. At one time, if you owned a chain of 30 Blockbusters, you thought you were on top of the world.
That is true. That is true.
Well, I don't know how to answer. I don't know how to answer that, because I don't know that there's very many people that truly have a legacy 50 years after they're gone.
Yeah. All right.
I hope there's something. I hope there's something that gets transmitted that they go, that came from Maurice and Lori, that came down through the DNA and the philosophy of the business, and people remember that. That's what I could hope for.
Yeah, I think I think part of your lineage will be that you're a builder, that you got a big heart, that you've got great intuition, and just talking about some of the stuff today about, the energy behind giving back, behind family, behind, being part of a community, the remembering gratitude, marketing, fulfillment, how to think differently, tapping. I think I may have said this, but I'll say it again, tapping into intuition. You are a really multidimensional human being, and you see things with such great and so many different lenses and perspective. And I think sometimes when I think about lineage personally, I think maybe somebody won't be able to maybe come up with that one specific thing, but they will be able to tap into the energy of that person. And that sometimes, even though you can't define it, you can feel it. And so,
But you see, John, once again, what my friend Rick said, you fooled him again.
well, and that's for episode 2, humility. Right. Well, Maurice, I can't thank you enough. This was great. I always love talking to you. I love your stories. I love your vulnerability. I love just the realness of how you kind of lay it out there. And thanks for sharing about your parents. Kudos to you and Lori for everything that you started and that what you've built. An amazing business, a beautiful family, and I can't thank you enough for spending some time talking with me today, the Think community today. And we really did get to the soul, I think, of you and your business, and I can't thank you enough. So thank you.
Well,
thank you.
John, got to thank you for giving me the opportunity. It was funny because before this conversation, Laurie said, "Oh, you're going to talk about yourself. You love that."
That's good.
I said, "Okay, well, thanks, John, for giving me the opportunity to talk about myself."
Hey, my pleasure. My pleasure. I'll do it anytime. All right. Well, Maurice, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Maurice, if somebody wants to connect with you, how can they connect with you?
Either on a personal level, my cell's 248-877-3911, or through the Pogoda Co. website, the www.p like Peter, OGODA. You have to spell Pagoda right. PagodaCO.com.
Awesome. All right, good.
Most people spell it wrong. That's why I have to say it that way.
No, hey, right. You're talking to John Dwoskin. Everybody spells my name wrong. So I get you. Maurice, thank you very much. We'll have this in the show notes as well if people didn't write it down. And appreciate you very much. Thanks so much. I'm grateful for your time and everything that you shared today.
Thanks, John. Good speaking with you.
You too.